Hi, welcome to Pop Culture Maniacs podcast. As usual, it's me, Kieran, and with me is Jean. And so we're going to talk about something, well, I like a lot. Hopefully, Jean does as well. Lord of the Rings. So, Jean, obviously, Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth series, Tolkien universe, whatever you want to call it. Do you want to go through your experience with the various iterations?
Sure. Yeah. I first kind of got exposed to Lord of the Rings when I was about 10 years old, and we read The Hobbit in school. And then I was totally hooked. I read all three of the Lord of the Rings shortly thereafter. Watched the films. We own all the extended DVDs. I've even been down to New Zealand and gone to Hobbiton and discovered that I am the perfect height to fit into one of the Hobbit holes on that set. So good for me on that. But yeah, I'm a big fan of all the Lord of the Rings versions that we have out there. I'm not quite, Stephen Colbert level super fan, but I'm excited to see where they go with the new Amazon TV show. So I'm definitely a fan.
Oh, good, and yes, so am I as well. I'm a bit. My first exposure was actually with the films, so saw the first film, read The Hobbit first because apparently that it is a lot easier to read than the Lord of the Rings books, and so yeah, I got into the books, got into the films. I would say Lord of the Rings is my Star Wars, which so you can tell how high in regard I like them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, obviously, and like you got the extended versions and DVDs. I have tried to watch all three in one day, but extended versions, but that is very, very difficult.
Oh my gosh, if you could have managed to do that, I would have been very impressed.
Yeah, I could. You could do two, but it's just hard to do all three in one day.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, well, most of our listeners will probably know the basics. Obviously published. Was it? I was going to say. Was it published in 1938, The Hobbit, and then the Lord of the Rings trilogy books were 1954 roughly.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds about right.
yeah. Written by J.R.R. Tolkien, who was an expert in Anglo-Saxon literature and Viking sagas, obviously. So very high. He taught at Oxford. Obviously, books became very popular, sort of like the bedrock for fantasy. And then Peter Jackson wonderfully adapted them in the early noughties, and there were various attempts to make the films beforehand. So before we get on to the Peter Jackson films, I think we may as well talk about like some of the versions that could have happened, because Stanley Kubrick was rumored to do a version, but I think he thought that the technology wasn't there. John Borman, British director, but because of the difficulties, he ended up making Excalibur, which is a fun film. And there was also probably the worst version, the one with all the Beatles playing the Hobbits.
Yes.
Which I think we're thankful that one, as much as I like the Beatles as musicians, I'm thankful that version never got made.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and then obviously Peter Jackson, when he was obviously started off as a sort of schlock horror comedy director in New Zealand, built his reputation, did Heavenly Creatures, which gave him a lot of cachet, and obviously sort of was able to make his dream project, even though there were obviously a lot of complications with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say with Lord of the Rings films, they are peak Jackson. I don't think he's been able to quite match that success as a filmmaker ever since.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the perfect marriage of, just a director who knows exactly what he's doing, has these technology and the skill to turn it all into reality.
Yeah.
Like it just was perfection.
Exactly. It's all like, as obviously story wise, I think it was the right level of adaptation. He obviously had to change some things because of but I think most of the changes I agreed with. I think like one of the famous things would be Tom Bombadillo. it would have been universe breaking if he was included in the film. I think other things like Elrin, because obviously in the books she disguised herself as a man, and it was a big surprise. But it's obviously a lot easier to do that sort of disguise in a book than it is in a film. So those sort of changes I don't mind.
Yeah, I didn't love, as nerdy as this is going to sound, I didn't love giving or excising the character of Glorfindel and giving all of his stuff to Arwen in the first film. I didn't love that.
I think that was just to give Arwen more to
Yeah,
do.
it was more to give her more to do, but the character, I'm not a huge fan of Arwen from the books. I was much more of an Eowyn fan for various reasons, but I just didn't love, I like the character of Glorfindel. I thought he was an interesting elf, and it would have expanded the elves a bit more too.
Yeah. Well, you say if you hated that in the live action film, you would have really hated the animated version, because they just expunged 2 characters. They just gave it to Legolas.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. So that's, and obviously, yes, obviously that's another thing that they got right. The casting. The casting couldn't have been much better, could it?
Oh yeah, and no, particularly the one that always gets me is the fact that Aragorn wasn't even supposed to.
I know. Because the story being like it was originally, was it Stuart Townsend, an Irish actor, and then Peter Jackson realized, no, he needed someone older to play the character. So
not as pretty.
Yeah, and that must have been really annoying for Townsend.
It must have really sucked for Stuart Townsend to look back and be like, he's already on set filming, we're gonna have to get rid of you and give it to Viggo Mortensen. Sorry.
Yeah, just quite sad, really. And obviously, Elijah Wood was fairly well known at the time. Sam Escher was obviously in Goonies. Ashton was in the Goonies. Obviously loads of actors. Jonathan Rhys, Mark Davis being in Indiana Jones. Obviously, I wouldn't go through the whole filmography, can't we?
Well, yeah, and I mean, to me, the most perfect bit of casting out of the whole cast was Ian McKellen. There's nobody else I could ever envision as Gandalf now. He was it. He was so perfect.
Yes, I totally agree on that one. And I've always quite a fun story because he was filming X-Men. Peter Jackson sent Bryan Singer a thank you gift of a few DVDs for letting him letting Ian McKellen finish his filming early so he can go and do Lord of the Rings. Obviously, maybe not so nice, and obviously to do all the speculation about Bryan Singer now. But let's just put that to one side for a moment. But it's just, and plus obviously loads of other actors, obviously like Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett, obviously gave him more international recognition. Obviously, Hugo Weaving was already known from the Matrix films, and
he did a pretty good job between him and Ian McKellen. The box office, just 6 of their films. It's pretty staggering.
Yeah, and even Carl Urban, though obviously he's had a very successful career, even though you could argue his character was not that much well, obviously the character was important in the books, but I think in the films he does sort of disappear, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of gets overshadowed by Aragorn's journey.
Yeah, as you say, it is sort of like that perfect blend of they just got everything right, the writing, the direction. I think as well, like with the special effects, they got that right mix of physical locations, physical sets, model work, and CGI. It's just sort of the perfect blend, really. Obviously, you can argue some of the CGI has it does show its age now, but it was incredible at the time. It was.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Andy Serkis work as Gollum, I think, still to this day holds up shockingly well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree on that one as well, and obviously Andy Serkis has now made a career wearing skin tight leotards.
Yep, that is his job, and he is taking it to the bank.
Yeah. So, yeah. Obviously, as well, Christopher Lee as Saruman as well. And that was because he was originally. I mean, he was originally tapped up, I think, for like one of the earlier versions to play Gandalf. But obviously,
Yeah,
they
and
moved him up. They moved him to Saruman, didn't they, for this version?
Yeah, and he'd gone on record as saying he did want to play Gandalf, and he was a bit disappointed until he got on set and worked with Ian McKellen and realized, no, this is perfect. We're gonna do really well with this.
Yeah. I would say with me, my favorite of the films is The Return of the King. But I think it's a complete package. You have that emotional investment from 2 films prior that makes those moments like I never thought I'd start a side by side with an elf, and how about side to side with a friend, and the like, I may not be able to carry the ring for you, but I can carry you. And then that beautiful music swell.
Yeah.
Said you needed those 2 films of investment to make it, to appreciate those wonderful moments.
Yeah, I think for me, I prefer, Two Towers. And that's odd for me because I remember reading the book, The Two Towers, and I really didn't like it because, if anyone who's read the book knows, it's split down the middle with the Sam and Frodo story and then everybody else. Yeah. And I didn't really care all that much about the Sam and Frodo story at that point. I was like, I want to know what's happening with Merry and Pippin and everybody else. So having to weed through all that just to get to that story. But when seeing it on screen, obviously they don't split it down the middle like that. Yeah. They interweave the story, and it's such a complex plot to have, so many different offshoots. And it's also the film that has the most Gollum in it. And I found myself very taken with the character and the portrayal, and the cliffhanger at the end of the film is really great. I remember watching it in the theater, and there were people around who hadn't read the books. And once, it ends with Gollum saying, we'll take them to her, she'll do it. I remember walking out of the theater and people going to their friends like, who's he going? What's going to happen? Who's he taking her to see? And all the friends are just like, you could read a book, and it's been around for 50 years. You've got that if you want it. And I'm assuming it caused a bunch of people to scurry off to their bookstore and actually buy the books to finally figure out what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I would say one of the few points of contentions I do have with the films is the portrayal of Faramir, because in the books he doesn't want to know the ring. He knows of its corrupting powers. That's why he doesn't want to see it. Whilst obviously he shares his brother's lust for the ring in the films. But at least in the second film, in the third film, he was a bit more redeemed.
Yeah, I feel like Faramir kind of got, I think it's similar to Éomer. They kind of got pushed to the side to allow Aragorn to be really the hero of the whole story. And he's, perfect. He's never been tempted. He's done all this great stuff, and he's wonderful. So they had to kind of move these guys over a bit to give the room for Aragorn's story.
Yeah, I think as well. So, have you ever heard of the YouTuber Lindsay Ellis?
I have not.
All right. Well, she's a big Lord of the Rings fan. She's done a few video essays on Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits. And it's like she sort of, like, as she describes it, force peeves, conflicts. Obviously, add that extra bit of drama with the obviously, hence Faramir wanting the ring.
Yeah, and it also helps an audience who's not particularly familiar with the book to tie him closer to Boromir and be like, no, this is his brother. This is an extra link we have between them. But unlike his brother, look at him. He's managed to resist it and move on.
Yeah. Obviously, one of the other things that I love about the film is obviously terrific action. I would say my favorite battle was the Battle of Helm's Deep in the film, because I think
absolutely,
it's because again, right mix of practical effects and computer effects. It's obviously very physical. Obviously, Peter Jackson modelled it off the Battle of Rorke's Drift from Zulu.
Well, and it benefits, like you said, about why you like Return of the King so much. You've spent all this time with even some of the minor characters at this point, and not all of them are going to make it alive, and so it has this just depth to the fight, to the battle, to all of it, that you wouldn't have gotten earlier in the film, because you are genuinely worried for even minor characters.
Yeah, and I think with the Battle of Helm's Deep, because the stakes, as you say, were so high. The people of Rohan were so outnumbered that they're having to bring in old men and kids into the battle. Obviously, state out that the Uruk-hai are pretty much the most toughest elves you can, not elves, toughest orcs you can face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and obviously, it's not book loyal. I do like the scene when the elves come to join in the battle, and he goes, "We are proud to fight along men once more." It's like men once more.
Hey, it works.
Yeah. Oh, and that's another thing they do very well. The big speeches, because you obviously got in the Return of the King, you obviously had the big Theoden speech at when the Rowan horsemen arrive, and obviously and Aragorn's big speech at the Black Gates.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta love a big battle speech.
Oh yeah. And you have to have them, or else, how do we know the big battle's about to happen?
Yeah. Not like the massive armies just coming towards you.
Hey, you never know. The army could just show up.
Yeah, we couldn't kill them now. We enjoy a show. We may as well wait.
Yeah, it might be more fun to wait, guys.
I do find one thing annoying about the theatrical version is they cut out the mouth of Sauron from because I thought it was brilliant in the extended version.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, and when I read the books, I always because as you said, Return of the King as well. That was split into two halves, and when I read it, I thought it sounded like Pippin died, because you said it's but the Eagles. This is my story. This is my story, and I thought he died, and then obviously continue, and obviously he lived. No, you robbed me of a death. I was sad that he died, and then I was annoyed that he lived.
I mean, I've got my own crazy story that's going to spoil Lord of the Rings if people haven't, for some reason, read it or watched it. Must have been like 11, reading Two Towers, and I'd been gutted in the first book when Gandalf died. Just gutted. I couldn't believe it. And I'm sitting there reading, and my mom knocks my bedroom door, sees that I'm reading the book. She goes, "Oh, has Gandalf come back from the dead yet?" And from the look on my face, she could obviously tell he had not, because I just was like, "What? He comes back?" And she's like, "Oh, terribly sorry. Dinner's ready," and then just walked away. And I was like, "What?" So I spent the whole rest of the book desperately trying to find the part where Gandalf comes back from the dead.
All right, there's a spoiler for you. Yeah, because it's only a different experience if you say watch. Because have you ever watched the animated version?
I've seen parts of it. I haven't watched all of it.
Basically, it's they try and condense like a book and a half into like a 90-minute animated film, and so it's very condensed. I didn't like it very much, but I can see. But Peter Jackson did, because he certainly does use it as an influence for certain scenes, and it does have a distinctive art style.
Yeah, I've heard I mean, I've talked to people who really enjoyed the animated version.
Yeah.
So I know it absolutely has its fans out there.
Yeah. And they're like a few other, obviously I haven't actually ever seen them, and you can't get them legally with just the Hobbit, the animated Hobbit film, and the animated the animated Return of the King film. And
yeah,
obviously finding out there's another animated version in like the 60s, but it was basically it's like one of those sort of is it Ashcan copies, where they basically made it so they just keep the rights to make the film.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is sorry, yeah. So yeah, that's something. There's a lot to mine with these with these books and films, and so I think we may as well move on to the Hobbit films. So
Yeah,
that was a really troubled production because Guillermo del Toro was about to make it, and then obviously it all fell apart with his version. Like Warner Brothers pretty much threatened to make The Hobbit with Brett Ratner or David Tolkien. Other options were Neil Blomkamp and David Yates, a Harry Potter director, but yeah, who would have wanted to see Brett Ratner's Hobbit?
I would not want that.
Yeah. So Peter Jackson was pretty much strong-armed into doing the films, and I think it showed. It showed because again, I would highly recommend watching Lindsay Ellis's 3-part video essay on the Hobbit films, because it is really fascinating.
And the other thing that was a mess too is Peter Jackson very publicly did not want to make 3 films for The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And had no choice. He was told to make 3 films for The Hobbit, which I think made a lot of, that's where a lot of the issues with the films come in, is that there's 3 of them. He had to pad them. It's a single children's book. It's not anything that you could feasibly create 8 hours of content out of.
I agree, because I think with The Hobbit, a straight adaptation of that book probably could easily be managed in like 2.5, maybe 3 hours at most.
Yeah.
Obviously, and even if you were able to extend it with a little bit with, say, stuff like the appendices from Lord of the Rings, even then it's not enough for a trilogy, let alone not enough for 2 films really, let alone 3.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And there was like one of the theories was why they made it into 3 films, because Harvey Weinstein had there's all the complications with all the rights to it. Basically, Harvey Weinstein had some rights to the profits for 1 film, but not for any more. So 2 films, he only gets the profits from 1 film. Make 3 films, so Warner Brothers and MGM get to keep more of the money.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we want, is Harvey Weinstein to have any money.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been watching a lot of Joe Blow videos on. They talked about a few times about the Weinstein. So the guy, as the narrator always goes, "Fucking Weinsteins."
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah. Peter Jackson was pretty much strong-armed into doing the Hobbit films. I wouldn't say he's entirely blameless, because I think he did make some very silly choices himself when making the films, like because he made it with that 48 frames per second format instead of the traditional 24 frames per second. So, and because of that, they pretty much made a lot of it more CGI heavy, because at 48 frames per second, models and matte paintings look more obvious than on 24 frames per second. And he obviously decided to give his mate more of a role, because he obviously had that annoying character Alfred.
Yeah.
Yeah, he liked the actor so much he gave him a bigger part. And it's just learning about the production problem. So it's like Peter Jackson was burnt out by it. They pretty much had no plan in the end during it. So they like had to have like big breaks. Andy Serkis, who was the second unit director, ended up having to do quite a lot of the work for the just. So it's amazing that actually something coherent actually even came out of it.
Yeah, I mean, considering everything that went into it, I'm surprised we got arguably a film and a half that are watchable out of all three.
Yeah. And there are things I still like about it. I think Benedict Cumberbatch's Smaug was brilliant. I think he again, pitch perfect casting there.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I take away from all three of those films is everything that happened in the Misty Mountains was just incredible. Like the Smaug stuff, the stuff with Gollum, that piece of the film is perfection. It's spot on. It's exactly like the books. It's intriguing, it's complex, it's scary, it's interesting. Like it's all there.
Yeah. And obviously I'm not sure how you feel. I would say Desolation of Smaug's my favorite out of those three. I think it's the one I enjoy the most out of them.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think as I said, the 5 battles was when it really fell apart, because you're trying to fit in make a few pages of the novel into this big epic battle. And
yeah,
I think
and just adding in so much other stuff that's not there.
Yeah. So like I know, and I think even when I watched it in the cinema, I just felt disappointed by it. And I think like the other silly thing is like the role of Legolas, because he should have just been a cameo. I think he should have just have him in when they're in the Mirkwood. So have him for a few scenes, and then for whatever reason, just say, yeah, you have to run his dad going, you have to run Mirkwood whilst I go away to the Lonely Mountain. Have that would have probably worked a lot better.
Yeah.
And then he wouldn't have, because then it wouldn't have affected his sort of like his arc in the original trilogy. I'm going to have to be careful on how I phrase it. As in, when I say the original trilogy, obviously the Lord of the Rings films, where he obviously had his dwarf prejudice, which he overcomes by the end of Return of the King.
Yep.
So undercuts it if he already had dealings with dwarfs in the Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was another thing, like the production notes, because Evelyn, what's her name? Sorry, I should really have looked this up beforehand. Who is the Lady Dwarf?
Oh, geez. I don't know.
Not Lady Dwarf, Lady Elf, even.
Oh, Evangeline Lilly.
Yeah, because she signed on to the role because she was promised that it wouldn't be that she wouldn't have a love interest. Studio came back to her right when they did like all the reshoots and stuff. Yeah. We want a love triangle.
Yeah.
Which and she because she's a decent actress, but she had that embarrassing line, and why does it hurt so much?
Yeah, and to her credit too, she just come off of Lost, where she dealt with being the center of a love triangle for a number of seasons, and she was frustrated with it and didn't like that. And so the last thing she wanted to do was just do that in a film.
Yeah. Oh, Sasha Roane was because Peter Jackson worked with her on The Lovely Bones. He offered her a role. I would have loved to know what role that she was considered for. Whether obviously it was a role that they just cut out, or whether it was for Levy's role.
She's way too young at that point.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
She was only like 15.
Yeah, so hence it wouldn't have been a love triangle.
It better not have been.
But again, I think that's not what Peter Jackson originally wrote.
Yeah.
Well, I'm about to say Peter Jackson. I mean his whole writing team as well.
Yeah.
He has
The
the same
whole
writing team.
crew.
Yeah. Obviously, with these films as well, with these, because I think it did break Peter Jackson because he hasn't made a blockbuster since.
He's tried, but he's never had the success that he's
No,
had with.
I mean after the Hobbit.
Right. Yeah.
Because
yeah.
he made he made a documentary about World War One, and he's got another documentary about the Beatles.
Didn't he have that thing where like cities were machines?
He wrote it. He didn't direct it. Mortal Engines. There is a lot of his team that was involved, but he didn't direct it himself. He just acted as producer and writer.
I mean, at this point, he doesn't need to do anything else unless it really is something that appeals to him. And I mean, after everything he went through with Hobbit, I couldn't imagine him really wanting to get involved in major studio work unless it was something very specific.
Yeah, it does sound so odd to me. Like Peter Jackson, he made Lord of the Rings, he made it a massive critical and commercial hit, and then Warner Brothers go, right, yes, you paid us lots of money and there's lots of awards, but we feel like we need to have tighter control on you, not let you do your own thing.
Yep.
It's sort of similar to like Sam Raimi when he was doing the Spider-Man 3. Again, Spider-Man 2 was a huge success, and then we're going to tighten control over you, not give you more free reign.
Yeah, and I mean, Peter Jackson's work on Lord of the Rings single-handedly saved all of New Line. Like, that movie studio was going to disappear if it fell apart.
Yeah.
And he gave them billions of dollars.
Exactly. But then, yeah, well, I'm going to make sure I'm never working in Hollywood. We know what the mindset of studio executives.
It's very much a what have you done for me lately, as opposed to what have you done in the past for me.
Yeah. As well, because he was nearly screwed. Because Peter Jackson was nearly screwed over with the money. Because didn't he have to sue Warner Brothers or New Line to get his to actually get what he was deserved to be paid?
Yep, there was a lawsuit.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, but he's a millionaire. He shouldn't be so greedy. I think yeah, because we should side with the heartless corporations.
Absolutely, that's how this works.
Yeah. Obviously, when we're recording this is roughly at the same sort of time with the Scarlett Johansson and Black Widow lawsuit. So this is for our listeners' benefits. So yeah, and I think before we move on to the before we move on, I'm just going to want to say that I think with the Battle of the Five Armies, it just felt like a fan service film, particularly with Legolas, because I think that's again was like one of the things you knew he wasn't going to die, so he didn't feel any peril when he had doing these impossible feats when he was like running on the running when that tower was collapsing. You pretty much using the stone blocks as stairs.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And then like that scene at the end, I know Aragorn, and he goes like, it's like there's a scene I think the fans were woo. It was more for me, and I was like, ugh.
Yeah, I remember watching it and everyone kind of groaned. They're like, really, this is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to get that out there. But yeah, so I think before we move on to the TV series, I think we should just talk about some of the other books. I wouldn't say I've read everything. I like the Unfinished Tales, which is basically like a collection of short stories and obviously stuff that was unfinished, hence the title. And there were some quite fun stories there, and it's sort of set for the various three ages. I didn't really like the Silmarillion though, because I think because it was written as a history. It felt more like reading an encyclopedia than reading a novel.
Yeah, I remember trying to read the Silmarillion when I was younger, but I just couldn't. Yeah, because like you said, it was more. It wasn't actually. There weren't stories.
Yeah,
They were just bits of history, so I didn't love it as much. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I've only ever read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books. I've never actually
yeah,
gone deeper than that.
yeah, because it is this wide mythology, and plus with Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth, Tolkien, because the rights are very, very complicated. Complicated because like you can own certain rights, you can own certain rights, but not others. Like Hobbit, they couldn't mention the names of the Blue Wizards, so he obviously had to skirt because of the rights issue. So they had to skirt around it by going of saying what their names again, can't remember them, and what other things were their names. And obviously, hence with the Hobbit, because MGM had Warner Brothers had to work with MGM because they owned the rights to the film rights to the Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very, very complicated. On what else was it? So yeah. Also, because have you ever heard of the sequel that that Tolkien ever did plan to write?
I have not.
Essentially, he only wrote about 10 pages before he scrapped it because it was set like 300 years after the events of Lord of the Rings. It was like Aragorn's sons was coming to the end of his reign, and because the events of Lord of the Rings were starting to sort of more fade into memory. So people kids were playing games of soldiers and orcs. There's all dark legends coming. I think whilst it would have been interesting, I think it would Tolkien made the right decision by not going forward with the idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, now obviously now let's get on to the big thing, the Lord of the Rings TV series that Amazon are making. And
Yep.
I would say this, the amount of money that they're spending on it actually sounds like it's too big to fail.
We say that now.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think it's kind of crazy that they spent almost, $1 billion on all of this solely because they had this idea that they have to find their own Game of Thrones. So instead of just getting, someone like Brian Cogman from Game of Thrones to pitch them an original story, because Brian Cogman did end up working in the first season of the new Lord of the Rings show. So they got him in anyway. And saving, $750 million, they bought all the additional Lord of the Rings stuff. It's just crazy. I mean, we've seen with other streaming services that, someone like Netflix buys, a comic, what was it, Jupiter something or other?
Yeah, Jupiter's Legacy, yeah.
Yeah, they bought all that and it bombed.
Yeah.
It just bombed. Nobody wanted it. Nobody cared about it. But they bought it because they wanted existing IP that they could try to create into their own, MCU, their own Game of Thrones, their own big fantasy, crazy story epic. And it didn't work.
Yeah.
And what Amazon's done is basically gambled their entire television production on this. And if it's not good, if people don't want it, if people don't care about it, they have the money to spare, but they've essentially crippled their entire television production studio. Yeah. Because why take this risk when you could have created 7 other TV shows? Their biggest TV shows on Amazon are The Boys and The Expanse. The Expanse they bought from Sci-Fi, and The Boys, they got Emmy nominations for it. They bought a comic that not a ton of people are aware of. It didn't have a huge fan base, but people love it. People are watching it. So it's proof that you don't have to go spend $1 billion on Lord of the Rings just to get a show that people are going to like.
Well, that's the hope, because obviously, because I looked up just before we recorded, I looked up who's developing it, and this sounds like an incredibly insane idea. The two people who's developed it and working as executive producers have never worked on a TV show before.
Yep.
Never. Their only other major credit is Flash Gordon, and it says earlier draft. So
yeah, I mean, the plus is they've got, like Jennifer Hutchinson, who has legit experience with Breaking Bad, and like Brian Cogman, who was pretty much the best writer on Game of Thrones, which, of course, HBO declined to move forward with his Game of Thrones spinoff. Why? I don't know. They're crazy. So you have people who have experience in big, high-profile writers' rooms. Yeah. But the interesting thing to me is you've got these two guys who don't have experience show running.
Yeah.
And Amazon couldn't lock down an official deal with Peter Jackson and company to get them involved on some sort of production level. That's the thing that kills me.
Yeah. It just sounds utterly mad. It's sort of like it's not got. So it does lead to the question: is it going to actually be set in like the same film universe?
Or is.
I was going to say, or is it going to be like its own thing?
I mean, it's obviously it's a prequel story.
Yeah, it's set in the Second Age, isn't it?
Right, but they said they're going to keep the same. I mean, they filmed it in New Zealand, or they're currently filming it in New Zealand, and they want to keep the same production standards, the same look, the same feel, so that it's actually a continuation all the way through.
All right. I see. I would say one of the big bright sparks for me is J.R.R. Ballander's directing the first two episodes. He's best known for he's a Spanish director. He made The Orphanage,
which I loved,
The Impossible, A Monster Call, which is a lovely film,
and Jurassic World.
Yes, which isn't so good, but I'm putting most of the blame on the screenplay, not his abilities as a director.
Yeah, and he's also an executive producer on Lord of the Rings too, which means he's going to have a bit more involvement than one might expect. So, I mean, they've got a couple really good people behind the scenes, hopefully guiding things. They've got a couple of interesting actors in the cast, but it's a. I mean, to be fair, we don't know much about it. It's not going to premiere until September of next year.
Yeah.
They're filming seasons 1 and 2 back to back. So there's going to be a lot that we have access to, hopefully quickly. But it's a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it does have some, just having got the cast list in front of me, obviously I noticed comedian Lenny Henry. I think the one that's actually been confirmed to have a role is Morphine. I think I pronounced that one very wrong.
You don't know Welsh? Come on.
It's not a real language. They just made it up to annoy the English. Yeah, so that's it. More. Miss Clark. I'll just call her Miss Clark. Who's I think Welsh actress, probably best known for starring in the horror film Saint Maud. So and she's playing Gladriel, so she's got big shoes to fill. Yeah,
I mean the two names that jumped out to me are Benjamin Walker, who was a Broadway actor, and then
he was Abraham Lincoln fighting vampires.
Yeah, and he was also Andrew Jackson in Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, the musical, which I like to say is the first musical about one of the American presidents, way before Hamilton. Yeah. And he also took the lead in American Psycho, the musical, which is always fun. And then Cynthia Day Robinson, who is a really interesting actress. She was in Spartacus, which is a great TV show. If you haven't watched it, highly recommend it. It's really fun. But it's an interesting mix of actors from all over the world, which is a unique thing, and a racially diverse cast too, which is also very interesting since the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit weren't particularly racially diverse. So
yeah.
that'll be a nice change.
I think the thing is with the Hobbit though, it's the sense of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, because they were set. Tolkien, it's pretty much Europe.
Right.
Hence why I think that's why there wasn't exactly a much diversity back when he wrote the original novels.
Yeah, I mean, but they're hobbits and they're elves and they're dwarves and could be anything.
Yeah. I was going to say one other actor I quite like is that Peter Mullen, the Scottish actor, is in it as well. So and he's usually a good presence in many films. Probably, just looking him up right now. Obviously, he was the drug dealer in Train Spotting. He was Sid, the immigration guard in Children of Men. So yeah, he's got quite a record as well.
Very nice.
Yeah. So yeah, but as I said, too big to fail. As you say, they're having to make 2 seasons. They're having to make 2 seasons back to back, and isn't the plan to make about 5 seasons overall?
Yes.
So yeah, and obviously this goes back to our earlier conversations with the streaming wars, the race for content.
Mm-hmm.
It's when this gold rush ends. It's gonna be a lot more unpleasant for creatives.
Yeah, and at some point these streaming services have to start, banding together, because frankly, there's too many of them.
Yeah. It's because it's going slightly off topic here, because Paramount Plus are going to launch in the UK, but from what I gather is they're having partnership with Sky. So, and Sky operate in UK, Ireland, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. So I think you have to have Sky anyway to have Paramount Plus. My question is, what's that going to mean for Star Trek? Because that's currently on Netflix at the moment.
Yeah, that's going to make things very complicated.
Yeah. We'll just have to see on that one. I think before we wrap up as well, I think it may as well talk about, because Lord of the Rings obviously had such an influence on the fantasy genre, because obviously so much fantasy writing has been influenced by Tolkien's work. Obviously, most famously, Wheel of Time is influenced a lot by Tolkien's work, and that's another fantasy show going to be released on Amazon.
Yep.
Game of Thrones, because as well, George R.R. Martin was a fan of the novels, and I think you could see some of the influences on. If you've read the novels, you can see some of the influences of Lord of the Rings on those novels.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's just what's it, Aragon as well, the novel written by a 15-year-old. It's essentially Lord of the Rings and Star Wars smashed up.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting as well. Like people do like read into Tolkien's work, though Tolkien absolutely hated allegory, because like what Lord of the Rings has been like interpreted as a World War II story, like that Sauron was Hitler, the orcs were the stormtroopers, the Shire being England. So getting all those, and like the Battle of Helm's Deep was meant to be a reference to his war experience in World War One.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and he was also, a Catholic theologian, so that also creeps in, although of course not to the extent of his buddy C.S. Lewis, but it's definitely somewhere in there.
Yeah. And you could argue it also affected the film industry, because obviously when Lord of the Rings was a success, everyone else was trying to make up their own fancy epics. So again, we got Fox had Aragorn, which flopped. Disney did 2 Chronicles of Narnia films, and then Fox did the 3rd one.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
And then we got the rise of the young adult.
Yeah. Yeah. So that changed things up. I also like something like Bridge of Tapperville, of the film there. They like marketed itself off as a big fantasy epic, and then when you watched it, you realise, oh, that's a bait and switch, because it's actually a serious drama with like just some fancy sequences in it.
Well, yeah, the crazy thing is, like, everybody I know my age and probably 10 years younger, everyone read Bridge to Terabithia growing up. That was like a rite of passage here for every kid in America. So when those commercials started coming out, we're like, what? No, that's not what this book is about. This book is about this. We all know it because it's like the first book we remembered being gutted by the ending. And so it was so weird to see those the trailers for that.
Yeah, I don't think it had that sort of cultural impact over here in the UK. So yeah, I wasn't. So yeah, I was a bit surprised when watching it. Yeah. So, but yeah, Lord of the Rings has had a massive impact on a lot of media.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the gold standard for an adaptation, really.
And for and modern fancy work.
Yeah, I mean, the movies came out right at the same time as the early Harry Potter films, and I remember going to see both and just being, impressed by Harry Potter, but absolutely just blown away by Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Oh, I think I should tell you this story because I saw all 3 films with my parents. My dad was not so keen on them, and like obviously when he was watching it, he kept standing up, thinking that the Return of the King was coming to an end, and then obviously it kept going and going and going. So yeah, that was just a sort of fun family memory. Yeah. So yeah, I think this was for our listeners. This is something we've been wanting to do for a little while, but for whatever reason, we just kept having to pull it off, didn't we?
I'm glad we took our time to get here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure we will talk about the Lord of the Rings TV show when it comes out in 2022, and see. Hopefully, it's good.
Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers.
Yeah, no, so am I. So anyway, listeners, again, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Subscribe. You know the drill by now. Thank you very much. Bye.